I think we have a question from Jason here. Have you looked at the effects of noise on valuations?
Yes. So have I looked at the noise? So noise can come in very different formats, and noise could be that you have some sales that are at arm's length, sales that are not at arm's length. For example, there is some hanky-panky going on sometimes. Sometimes there are things that we don't know. Sometimes there's a policy change. So there are things that are not in the general market knowledge space. I would consider that as noise. But every property that transacts is a signal. And we have to then see, at times people get, there was a story that Kevin and I were discussing about a property that sold in Severn area, and it had 71 bids, registered bids on it, 71. So yes, that would not be a normal case. So I would consider that as noise. That's not a signal. So in a way, I would say we have to find ways to keep the outliers, identifying the outliers, not just something that looks different, but something that is completely an outlier, not to force our valuations differently.
Yeah. We have Jason.
Oh, noise.
Actual noise. What about
that? Yes. So interestingly, this is very funny. My wife, who did her planning degree at the University of Waterloo some time ago, she wrote a paper on this noise, and that's how we were both very interested at one point. So yes, noise do have an impact, and it adversely impacts the property prices. So usually there are contours drawn around a large airport based on the level, and then again it depends upon the planes. Planes landing make less noise. So if your house ends up being on the landing approach, that's less noisier than if it's a takeoff approach, because when the plane takes off, there's more noise to it. So if properties on the takeoff approach would be more adversely impacted, but there is a direct impact of noise, airport noise. Similarly, there is an impact of noise or vibration from streetcars. So people think that being near public transit is always positive, but there is sort of this trade-off between being too very, very near, too close to comfort, and something that is, you want to be within walking distance, but you don't want your home to be shaking. If you're familiar with the University of Toronto's education building, which is on Bloor and St. George. Sure. That building shakes every time the subway passes underneath it. So you're sitting down lecturing or studying, and then suddenly the building does this, and then you can hear the subway going. So yeah, you're near transit, but you're too near transit. Maybe you want to be a block and a half away from it.
Yeah. And we've got a message from Patrick. Are you, or have you found that prices follow any particular distribution?
Like a statistical distribution?
I imagine this. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes, they follow. So it's safe to assume that you can assume them to be Gaussian, follow a Gaussian or what you call a normal distribution. There's always skewness in the data. There's always extreme values. So basically, the goal should be to look at the very tail end of the observations and see if they're not offering any meaningful contribution to your analysis, then keep them aside. And then when you keep the tails out, then the data looks quite smooth. I have found that data approximates Gaussian distribution, especially when you log transfer, you take the natural logarithm of the price, then it follows that distribution a little better.
In a market like like this, it feels like it almost feels like there's no rhyme or reason to pricing. It just seems like almost a feeding frenzy out there. Yes. Are you still able to make meaningful analysis of what the data that the data inputs that you're receiving now?
So so we're looking at the data, and it's quite interesting. Where I think, okay, so the market is the collective action of all the agents available, right? So
Yeah.
there are buyers and there are sellers, and then there are mortgage providers who, and then there's the governments who are setting the Bank of Canada rate from which you get the mortgage rate. So there's a cost of debt or the cost of servicing debt. All of these are working collectively. And so when you say that, as Mustafa was saying, that the prices are on fire and the markets are going rapidly, yes, this is true. They are going. There's tremendous amount of movement in the markets. But at the same time, for example, we looked at Muskokas in a column about 2 weeks ago, and we say yes, there's in the northern recreational property area, there's tremendous increase in prices, and there's been a lot of sales. But if you look at what happened after April 2017 in that area, since April 2017, so you have 2018, you have 2019, and then you have 2020, there was not much happening there. So there were 3 years of slowdown, and then suddenly things wake up and then whatnot. So you realize that there's always this pent up demand, and then people saw the mortgage rates go down to absolutely almost zero, and not zero, but it's almost free money, like 1.5%, 1.6% mortgage rates. Like you can get a 3-year variable for 1.45 now. So all of these things then bring people in and say, well, I've been waiting outside, and there were people who would have bought something in 2017, 18, and 19, but they couldn't because of the changes, and now they are in the market. At the same time, you see that the listings are not there, right? Like hardly 50 waterfront properties listed in Muskoka areas, hardly any reasonably priced properties in the city of Toronto, south of Steeles, in low-rise component. So you realize that the listings are not there. So then buyers sort of get a feeling of fear of missing out, and then they start bidding crazy. So that's where it is. But I think in the next few weeks, if a couple of months, you will see an increase in supply, where people would realize that actually they may miss out if they wait too long. So they will bring and list their homes. And when that happens, I expect the prices to be moderating a bit. And I also wouldn't be surprised if the federal government decides that they have to send a signal that this housing market is getting too hot without really changing the interest rates. They may find another way, like stress test, to cool off the markets. It's possible for them.
Yeah, I think you and I have chatted about this a little bit before. That it's actually fairly ironic that in the middle of the pandemic, state of emergency, stay-at-home orders, you have probably the hottest market we've seen in many years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look. The advantage now, I'm sitting in Mississauga, and this is my home office, and to have this much of office space in downtown Toronto, I wouldn't be able to afford any such thing that would give me this much office space. No, I wasn't planning for a COVID or a pandemic to be working from, but this is what I do now. I've spent most of my time working from here. So this is how the value of home has changed. There was a blurred line differentiating home and office, and since mid-March, that line has disappeared. Your home is your office now. So people are realizing that the valuation that they had in their minds, let's say a suburban home where they'll go and sleep, well, they are not going there to sleep now. They're actually working from there. So that's why you see that actually the functionality of home, the very use that a home was providing has changed. People are actually spending more time. I mean, when was the last time someone who works for a bank actually went to a bank and worked from their office, like in a big tower? I was in downtown Toronto yesterday, walking through the streets, and I was surprised again that even now this town looks really empty, and then the life on the streets is not there. So I think what you see now is people's valuation of housing has changed because they see that housing is more than just a place to sleep. So it's been. I think the other thing is the shift in spatial equilibrium, right? There was the downtown and the urban core, and everything near urban core would be more expensive. And now, as Mustafa was showing us, Ajax has picked up. I remember writing a column about a year ago that Ajax is going to pick up because it has the GO train, it has all the linkages to the big city, and it's very underpriced. it makes no sense for Ajax to remain as such. This is something we wrote about a year ago. So I was very pleased to see that Ajax, is happening because it makes sense. So one of the things I hope that my association with Zolo will bring is that we should be able to empower the agents with these kinds of insights, that not telling them what happened yesterday, but telling them, well, wait, a year down the road, this is a good possibility. And that kind of that insight and then foresight is I think would make a big difference between what Zolo's the team provides and what others do.
Yeah. So we actually have a really great question in chat here. So Mike and Caitlin Russo say, out near London, we've seen neighboring small hamlets see a rapid growth alongside of London and St. Thomas. Are these small towns at a higher risk if there is a softening in the market or a shift in demand?
Well, that's a good question. Now, if my memory serves me right, between December 2019 and January or February 2020, over a period of 1 month, prices in London climbed by about 20% or more.
Wow.
Now that's a month-over-month change. Same thing has happened in Hamilton and whatnot. So yes, there has been a significant acceleration in prices in all these places, and there's a significant risk because, see, at the end of the day, people who live there, work there, their wages are not going up by that much. So there's a disconnect. So whenever there's a disconnect and a widening of gap between how prices are rising and how wages are rising or otherwise, then you see a correction coming in. So you have to maybe advise your clients who are buyers to say, look, this 30% increase that happened today, don't expect that next year, if you want to sell it, that it would have appreciated by 30%. Housing does not continue to appreciate 30% year by year over a longer period. You have these peaks, but then they follow with moderation. People wouldn't lose money in the sense that they wouldn't be saying that, oh, look, my home is half the value that I paid. But they would see that the pace of increase would change or slow down or even disappear. And you have, as I think there's a need to educate buyers that make an informed decision. Do not make this assumption that if you have paid 30% higher over a year, over a month, that someone will come back next month and pay you even 30% more.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a stats question, and I suspect you're just the man to ask. So can you explain what seasonally adjusted means functionally in relation to reported real estate stats?
Yes. And you know what? There's a econometrician whom I have followed all my life. His name is Damodar Gujarati, and he wrote books on econometrics. And about a few weeks ago, I was actually going through his book, and he answered this question for me. I always thought, how do we calculate this seasonally adjusted? I'll give you the concept, but he had his book. His new book is called Econometrics by Example. And in that book, I think it's chapter 1 or 2, in which he shows how to do seasonally adjusted calculation. Basically, what we do is we say that instead of reporting a monthly change in prices, month over month change in prices, and say, well, this week the average price, let's say not the prices, but sales. Let's say in last August or July, 10,000 sales happened in Toronto. That's in the Toronto Real Estate Board area, 10,000 and change.
Yeah.
Seasonally adjusted means that we report the annual sales in August as if the trend in August had continued throughout the year. Then we would say that the seasonally adjusted sales in August were 98,000 in Toronto. Now, you know that the actual sales were 10,000, but by seasonal adjustment, we take the seasonality out of it. For example, Boxing Day sales is seasonality. The before Christmas, the end of November, early December shopping, these are seasonality trends. So there's a statistical technique in which we take the seasonality out. And then after taking the seasonality, we take this month's number or current time period's numbers and extrapolate it to be what would have happened the whole year. So seasonally adjusted sales, you would see maybe 95,000. That's for the year, but the monthly sales are still 10,000 or whatnot. So essentially, seasonally adjusted is our attempt to remove seasonality. I don't like them. I like raw numbers.
Great. So you were mentioning just before about the prediction that you made in the Ajax market and how that's come to pass. Do you, looking into your crystal ball again, do you have any other predictions? Is there any other interesting trends that that you're sort of looking at right now?
So in terms of uncertainty, right? Like you look at job losses, if there's a manufacturing plant, you really don't know. You can't predict what would happen there. That's a big challenge. But then there's some industries that would be stable, right? So we will not shut down our hospitals, right? That's a career, that's a job that will always be operational. We may not send kids to school or universities, but we won't shut our schools down. It wouldn't be that Canada has decided to shut all its universities for good. Now people would only have high school education, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things that you realize would never happen. So I think university towns, small university towns like Guelph, University of Ontario Institute of Technology, UOIT out there in the east and Durham region, Kitchener-Waterloo. I think Kitchener-Waterloo have probably passed that because they have been uprising for quite some time. And recently McMaster and Hamilton area because of McMaster. I see value in university towns because their funding models are stable. They employ 3 to 5,000 people. And then the price appreciation during uncertain times, my safer bet would be on university towns. That's how I see that, because they are the anchor in the society. And then if they have a university town with 5,000 employees and 15,000 students, so you have all the restaurants running there, all the barbers would have a job, the small retailers would have a job. If somebody's selling shawarma, they would have a job. If someone, so you can see that there's a whole ecosystem of jobs that these university towns support. So my guess would be look at towns that have not really appreciated in value in the recent last 10 months and see what their potential is. The other thing I always like is accessibility. That accessibility premium has been affected by COVID-19, but anything that is on GO line, anything that is on high, which we call heavy rail line, so GO line, GO or Metrolinx in Toronto, Agence Métropolitaine de Transport in Quebec, or Vancouver, they have regional trains. Anything that has not appreciated along the rail lines would always have a potential to appreciate just because of the potential to live there and then commute to downtown. There would be some slowdown in downtown demand for a good few years until we figure out what our futures would be. But I think that's a safer bet longer run.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember reading a book by Richard Florida a little while ago. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with some of his work, but one thing that he was talking about in the development of cities is that there are certain trends that you can see. So in one example, you can look at where all the artists in a
the Bohemian Index, he calls it the Bohemians.
Oh yeah, okay, that's great. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So Richard Florida is a professor at Rotman School of Management, one of the most widely read urban specialists. He studied at Columbia and one of the best-selling authors on this very topic. So I encourage everyone to read his work. He has been of the view that we're creative class. He calls them the creative class. Wherever a creative class would be artists and engineers and scientists. So they add value to the city and whatnot. So I am sort of conflicted on this for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that, when you say that, like, let's say I run a model and I have two places, two neighborhoods, one is creative class and the other one is regular folks. And I realize that the housing selling in the creative class neighborhoods is of higher price. I can't figure out if people who are living there are overpaying.
Yeah.
Because if all else being equal, you end up paying more for a house in a neighborhood where there are artists or engineers. Like, I'm an engineer, but what value I provide to my neighbor, right? Like, if I have a painter living next door, other than occasional coffee, how much value can you draw? So I think there's a question of, is the house getting more value or people are overpaying for the price of living there? But his observations are amazing, because his main thesis is that the economy needs the creative class to innovate, to diversify, and there's no denying that. That's a tremendous insight from Richard Florida.
Yeah. We've got another question coming in from Mike and Caitlin. In your opinion, from the monthly data sets released by the local boards, what do you think the top 3 or 4 stats would be to provide the clearest picture of the market to the clients without overwhelming and confusing them?
The few things are number one, that to me, I think the average price doesn't mean anything. Average price, you're not buying an average house.
Yeah.
So there's no average neighborhood, and there's no average lot size. To tell the client to say, look, you just look at the trends, prices may be going up or down, and that's all you need to know. You're buying a house, not an average house. You're buying you're trying to live in a neighborhood, not in the average neighborhood. There's no such thing as an average neighborhood. All things are very local in real estate context. So to tell your client saying, look at the numbers, just focus on the things going up or down. If the prices are rising, then you know that there's greater demand. There's a thing that we use, which is called sales to listing ratio. And you look at how many sales happened in the previous time period, how many units were listed. And if there are more sales than listings, and it could, if numbers reaches 65% or something like 60%, you see that the sales are rising faster than listings. So you can tell the client that prices are rising. Compared to listings, there are more sales. So demand is increasing more than supply. And you're entering the market in this moment, and look for the house that meets your budget, and look for the house that you really are in love with, and then go after it. Everything else is immaterial, because they are averages, and averages is not what concerns you.
Are there any data points that have really surprised you, just in terms of their impact? Are there any points that you've seen that you think, wow, I would have never thought that it would affect value like that?
Well, the London example was the one, I never expected London, Ontario to increase in values this quickly. I mean, it's a university town. It meets my thesis. Like Guelph is a university town. London, Ontario Sudbury is a university town. But to see 20, 30% month over month increase is tremendous. So that surprised me significantly. It could also mean that the supply side is very small. London is a very small town. So a small switch in the mix of housing could change. I mean, the housing, the problem with average housing is also that, in one time period, you may have smaller sized homes sell. In the next time period, a few bigger homes sell. So it's not that the average price of every house has increased. It's just that the homes that sold, their average price was high. The housing is a very heterogeneous good. So averages could be very misleading. The things that surprised me is the realization that COVID-19 has hurt the rental households more. And so my initial expectations, I was in agreement with CMHC, expecting prices to decline, expecting sales to decline in April and May. And it was only in June and July that I started to realize that the COVID-19 pandemic has hurt individuals who were daily wagers, individuals who were blue collar workers, and it spared the homeowner class to a large extent. And then now that you're sitting home and you're not going out for coffee, you're not spending money on lunch, your kids are not going out, so people have got higher savings. And then this desire to buy something now that I've got the saving and the pandemic hasn't hurt me, so I should do something about it. That realization, hindsight 2020 is now, but I didn't have it, so I would consider it as a surprise. The fact is that the rental cohorts have been hurting in COVID-19. I was very pleased to see when Mustafa mentioned that Calgary is showing strength, because this Calgary market is very close and dear to my heart. And I've been seeing it struggle for no fault of their own. I mean, Calgarians have suffered tremendously in seeing their, if you look at the Korea data, they show you month over month change, and they show you 12-month change, and they show you 5-year change. So you see that Vancouver was much higher 5 years ago than now. But Calgary, you see Calgary still low, it's down. So any increase there would be very welcome. I'm really looking forward to seeing Calgary market rebound.
Yeah. So a year from now, when the pandemic is hopefully behind us, we've got vaccines in everybody's arms, and we're having a return to normal. Do you see that some of the pandemic influences and how it's catalyzed the real estate market? Do you see how do you think that would affect? Where do you think we'll be a year from now with that? And
So,
yeah,
a year from now, I think we would have a successful rollout of the vaccine. I think we would have reached a herd immunity by by first quarter of 2022. I'm also not expecting any other surprise variant of this virus. I'm not an expert in health. I'm just going by what I read in the journals. I don't do research on this, but luckily I have access to all the journals from university libraries. So I just go through them. I'm not expecting a surprise. What I do see is sort of a shift at what I think is called a shift in spatial equilibrium, that people have realized that they don't have to, especially people in large cities, that they don't have to be packed like sardines in subways and buses and streetcars and go trains, making that trek to downtown or to the office markets. And they realize that they could be equally productive from their homes. And so there will be a mix, a hybrid model in which people would decide in collaboration with their employers how much time they would go and occupy space in downtown. And also what I would see is a peak spreading, not only that people will be working from homes in the future, at least 1 or 2 days, if not more, a week, but they also wouldn't feel the need to go to work at 8 a.m. in the morning. So they may say, well, I've been working from home. I'm going to go to work today. Maybe I go to work at 11. I don't have to be stuck in the traffic. So the city would look very different. The city would be busy at different hours in the future than before. I from Mississauga. I take the GO train, arrive at Union Station, and then from there I walk up to my office at Bay and Dundas, where my campus office is. And then in the morning period before pandemic, actually there's a pedestrian gridlock on Front and Bay. And there are tens of thousands of people getting out of those GO trains. Each train brings in 2,000-3,000 people. If 3 trains arrive, you've got 9,000 people trying to exit. That kind of flux, I don't think would be returning to the cities very soon. It would take some time. It may happen to the same level before, but I think the shift has happened. People's understanding and appreciation of their homes have changed. So for realtors, they should realize now that people have a newfound respect for their homes. They never thought that their home could be their office, and their home would be so readily compliant in providing more than just housing services. So that is something that we would see in the future, and that change, the multiple use of housing, would affect valuation in the long run. Right now, many analysts are not probably explicitly factoring in that your house has just suddenly become your work. That's a new feature you have added. It's like adding 2 bedrooms to a house. And so when you add 2 bedrooms to a house or a new deck or something, and then you get more value for it, you're not surprised. But that your house has suddenly become your office and it's still functioning, that should count for something. Maybe there's some valuation increase in prices is because of the fact that housing could be so multiple uses. So a year or two from now, I hope that we are more social. I haven't seen my friends in months. I've got a table tennis table and I've got a machine attached to it. I play with the machine. I rather like play with others. So I'm hoping that this herd immunity comes into the society. And then when that happens, you will see other shifts, maybe the inner core of cities. So, for example, in Toronto, I would say East York is a typical area when it's safer to travel, and when restrictions on mobility and assembly are lifted. I think places like East York, not core, but around the core, the inner suburbs, they should appreciate at a faster rate. That's my expectation for the next year and going forward.
So the hamlets around London that the Russos were referencing earlier, those you still believe will be continuing to increase.
Oh yes, I mean, see the big shift which I've not discussed is that right now, when you hire people, if you are looking for talent and someone sends you a CV, you put a job on Zolo and say we're looking for a computer programmer, and then a CV comes in from South Africa, and you look at the CV, you call the person, and you're amazed at that talent. And if it's affordable, more affordable than what you would have found someone in the like in California or whatnot, you would hire that person. And you say, you don't need to worry about the visa. Stay there. We'll figure out a way of we'll outsource you. So I think this opening up of the white collar employment markets, where the future growth in innovative technologies, they would be independent of geography. They would be free of geography. So a lot of this would create some uncertainty. I wouldn't have any answers now. But I think one way for the realtors to be able to be prepared for it is say that the unknowns would increase. What we don't know and what we don't know about the future would increase. But what really matters is what this place has to offer. I mean, at the end of the day, I have lived abroad. I grew up in places where actually it's people's lifelong dream to come to Canada. And it's a dream shared by, I would say, no fewer than 4 to 5 billion people across the planet who want to be in Canada, who want to be in Toronto, who want to be in Kitchener-Waterloo, who want to be in Chicoutimi. I mean, there's billions of people who would do anything to be here. So I think that's where the demand for housing lies in Canada, that there's billions out there who would like to be part of this family of 39 million in Canada. So that's why going forward, I'm more optimistic. I see all sorts of these trends that people can hire workers abroad, of course, and there would not be a need for that worker's house here because that worker is in South Africa. But I still have 3 billion other people ready to move in tomorrow. So I believe there's good future as long as Canada is what it is. It's a great place. It's a place with equity. It's a place with mutual respect. It's a place where people's diversity is celebrated. It's a place that creates jobs. You would have a very high demand going forward. And I think our economy is stable. Our fundamentals are strong. We are conservative people when it comes to spending. So we always have Canadians with some savings. So I'm not afraid in the short term or in the long term about the economics of the place, and from that projecting housing markets as well.
That's great. So I think we'll take one more question before we wrap things up here. So another one from the Russos, and don't apologize for the questions. I think they've been great. So aside from staying current with the monthly stats, what other data stats should we follow, and how can we use them to bring the most insight and value to our clients?
So I think CMHC has websites that are very informative. Housing market reports, they're conservative in their outlook. Yes, it's true, but they have data that only they collect, or Statistics Canada collects on their behalf. I spend a lot of time visiting their website looking for data. I also spend time on websites like Trading Economics. And Trading Economics is a website that provides time series data on economies across the world. I am unable to download it, but I'm able to see it. So for me, I just want to see how trends are. So I look at there. I am sort of hooked to Statistics Canada's website. So the first thing I do in the morning is I look at their daily section. In the daily section, Statistics Canada has the data releases for the day, and I go through that summary every morning. I also look at research that comes out of Conference Board of Canada and Toronto Regional Toronto District. What is it called? Toronto Board of Trade. But Conference Board of Canada produces a lot of research. CREA is another place. The Canadian Real Estate Association. They're very good in providing monthly updates. Their website is full of it. All sorts of information. I think what really my hope for Zolo is that we create pipelines of all these data sets into Zolo so that they become part of the Zolo's architecture. So the clients and the realtors who are there can have this access, because a lot of this information is readily available. It's not proprietary, and they would be happy to build those pipelines. And I think others lack that vision for an informed clientele, for informed realtors. But I think Zolo has this vision of being data and vision and insights driven. So yeah, and I think so. In addition, so these are things. So Statistics Canada is daily in the morning, conference board, and trading economics. If you always, anytime you want to know how the real estates is or interest rates are working or housing starts, just go on trading economics, type there, and you'll get there.
Dr. Haider, thank you very much. Both your presentation and this little talk we just did right now, really informative stuff. I think we've all learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.